Hello and welcome. Today's video is part 3 in a series where we cover the major update version 3 firmware for Coolvox IP PBX system. Part 1, I walked you through the new graphic user interface and the wizard. In part 2, we featured the Ultra Zero Touch installation capabilities available with version 3. And today I want to focus on some of the advanced features available from within the GUI. What's new in version 3? Well, first there's a new quick setup wizard that I demonstrated in video 1. There's also a greatly improved user interface which you've seen throughout videos 1 and 2 and you'll see again today. A user portal that allows you to click to dial and has a window pop up. That again was demonstrated in video 1 if you'd like to see it again. And what we focused on within video 2, which was the Ultra Zero Touch capabilities available in version 3. Part 3. So let's have a look at some of the advanced features available in Coolvox. First, inbound settings. So within the GUI, on the Inbound Control section, you can set IVR, time conditions, inbound routes, DID, inbound fax, and blacklist. I'll give you a demonstration of some of these features. First, log into the GUI. Telephony. Inbound control. I've got to set up an IVR first, so I'll add IVR and give it a name. I'll also give it a number. This is really so that if I need to test it and dial internally, I can do so. Set a voice prompt for the IVR. This, of course, you can record yourself. The number of times I want the IVR to loop before it goes to a keystroke. I can enable this if I wish the caller to dial an extension number directly. I can also set permissions on the IVR. And then I can set the specific events that I wish to track. So for an invalid key, or if the person hangs up. And I can set the actual menu. So this menu is typically when you dial into a system and you hear press 1 for sales, press 2 for support. So as you can see from the drop down menu, very flexible in terms of what we can set. We can set it to go to an extension, to a voicemail, to a department, which department is new and is almost like a ring group. We can set it to, yes, multiple departments. To an extension. And we can even set it to hang up the call. So I'll save that. And there you can see we have an IVR called Welcome to Zycoo. Next we'll set time conditions. Time conditions are a great way for your business to define when you're open, when you're closed, when you're on holiday. Based on this information, you can allow the PBX to take different actions. So first, I'm going to set my holidays. For example, this one is my New Year holiday. This box here lists the days and times and durations specified for your holidays. And you define the start day and time here. So I'm going to set my start month, day, and time. Same for the end, so I'll set the year, the month, the day, and the time. Confirm all those and add them into the list. Submit. And here I have my holiday defined. Next, I'll define my weekdays and business hours. The assumption here is unspecified days and times are out of hours. So I'll call this office working time. So here's the days of the week. I'll set Monday as 9 till 6. Tuesday, I'll set the same. Well, I'll set the same like most businesses for the working week. Note, I've excluded Sunday and I'm going to exclude Saturday as well. So I'll submit those and there you go. Office working time is in my list of weekdays. Now I can set a time rule. So this really allows you to control what happens to inbound calls, both during in hours and out of hours. So I'll call this office time rule. Yeah, I'll set my weekdays as my weekdays rule, office working time, and I'll set my holidays to be my holiday rule, which is New Year holidays. Submit those. So there you go. I've created an office time rule, which has weekdays, my weekdays rule, and also my holiday rule included. Now that we have some time conditions set, we can look at inbound routes. So on this particular device, we've got 4 FXOs. So if we choose, we can do something different with each of them. So on this one, I'll set the office time rule. And if we look at this, a time rule for handling inbound calls. If no time rule selected, all inbound calls at any time will be sent to the same destination. So it's worth noting that. So in business hours, set it to an IVR called welcome. And in non-business hours, so when the business is closed, we'll set it to go to voicemail. Voicemail for extension 100. You can also set a distinctive ringtone for this particular trunk to aid you in identifying it, an inbound call that originates from it. So let's put something into here and submit it. Now, one of the benefits of the CoolVox system is that if we really wanted to, we can define another set of conditions for a different trunk. So I'll set this one the same in terms of time rule. But during business hours, I may want this one to do something different, say go to an extension or an IVR. And out of business hours, I can set it to do something else. to maybe ring an emergency extension or another voicemail. And like before, I can set a separate distinctive ringtone on this trunk. So that's inbound routes. Next, we'll move on to DIDs, which is a way to manage inbound calls specifically from dedicated numbers, so as opposed to trunks. So if we enter our inbound number here, so this can be from a VoIP provider, PRI provider, BRI provider. Then choose a destination. So decide where you want to route those calls. So in this instance, I'll route it to an IVR, and I'll give it a distinct ringtone as well, so that we know that the call is originating from that DID. And here you can see the call set in the menu. You can manage inbound fax. So there's various options: save to system, send as email, and use a traditional fax machine. If saved to system, the inbound fax will be stored in the IP-PBX. Send as email, the inbound fax will be received and then sent to the email address specified. Or if you connect directly to a fax machine, the inbound fax will be forwarded to the fax machine. So as an example, I can set a fax machine and tell the system which extension the fax machine is on. Submit it, and there you go. Blacklists. So you can blacklist an inbound telephone number if you believe it is spam or for whatever reason you want. Any numbers listed here will be unable to call the system. For example, I'll enter a number here, and as you can see, it's added it in as a blacklist number. It'll give you the number, person who created it, and the date and time it was created. So that concludes inbound control. So let's talk about outbound control. So in the new version 3 GUI, we've simplified the way to configure outbound and made it even easier than ever. You can prepare dial rules, dial permissions, outbound fax, and set pin sets, which allow you to secure certain defined outbound calls. So I'll give a demonstration of this then. So we'll log into the version 3 GUI. Yeah, and if I go to outbound control, here in the trunks section, you'll find defined any physical trunks on the system, such as FXO, and also any VoIP trunks that you have set. This machine has 4 FXO fitted. There's a bulk edit facility available where you can select multiple trunks and change them all at once. Call recording. You can enable, disable it. You can change the outbound volume on the trunks as appropriate, as well as the inbound volume. These settings are for primarily analog trunks. When enabled, you can answer on polarity or hang up on polarity detection. You can define the prompts language. For instance, if a call isn't answered, then it will notify the caller to leave a voicemail in the language you've set. You can enable busy detection, again on analog lines, to check that the line is still in use, and there are associated parameters of busy count and busy pattern. So all this can be done through bulk edit. VoIP trunks, we'll create one to give you a demonstration of how this is achieved. First, let's give the trunk a name. Enable authentication if required. You can turn this on or off. Provide a domain name or IP address for the host provider. And the port. If authentication is enabled, then you will need to specify a username and a password. You can stipulate a contact user, which is required by some SIP service providers, the retry interval, and the trunk type. So you've got a choice between server mode and client mode. There are some additional options. Call recording, you can define that within this section. And you can change the languages for the prompts and various other things. We'll submit that. And there you go. The VoIP trunk itself is now live. Pin sets are a way of defining security codes that can then be used to secure your outbound calls. I'll add one now. I'll create one called local call and give it a number 123 and submit it. I can add a second one. Call this one international and give it a different PIN code. Okay, we have some pin sets now, so we can use them in future if required to secure an outbound call. So let's go on to dial rules. So dial rules define how you manage your outbound calls. I'm going to create one. First, I need to add in a name for the rule. Optionally, I can set a time condition. I'll set this to the office time rule I created earlier. I can prepend a number, such as an area code, to the outbound number, e.g. 028. I can also create a dial prefix. Again, this will go in front of the number dialed. Typically, this is when you need to use e.g. 9 to dial out to make a call. Dial patterns define the rules that must be matched for the outbound call to be made. As you can see, X refers to any digit between 0 and 9. In this example, any 3-digit number between 0 and 9 followed by something else will match this rule. Pin codes, as you know, we set earlier, so I can select one of these should I choose, and I can add in the number of trunks that can be used as part of the rule. Where you have multiple trunks defined in your outbound rule, you can choose how you want the outbound call to work, linear or linear cycle. Click Submit. You can define as many dial rules as you require. I've already set one for a local call. For instance, I may also want to create a rule to make international calls. Again, I can set time conditions should I wish. I can prepend the call should I wish. I can add a dial prefix to the outbound number. I will definitely need to set a different dial pattern to differentiate it from the previous rule. International calls generally start 00, and I can define a pin set for this and set the trunk to be used. So I'll submit that, and that's it, complete. I now have a dial rule for a local call and a dial rule for an international call. Next we'll talk about dial permissions, because dial rules and dial permissions are very much intertwined. So if I add a dial permission and give it a name of local call, I can select one of the predefined rules that I've already created. So I'll give it the permission to dial locally. And if I wanted to, I could also restrict permissions to certain activities on the PBX, such as to join a queue, so I'll submit that. I can also create a rule for international calls. An international caller will need to be able to use the international dial rule. And again, if I wish to restrict internal permissions, I can. Finally, I may have a scenario where I want a user to be able to dial both locally and internationally. So I can create a dial permission with this in mind. So I drag across both local and international. Change that to a bit better name. As you can see, I have 3 different levels of permission now. One for local, one for international, and one for both. And I can assign these to extensions as necessary, as well as inbound fax that I showed you earlier. Version 3 also supports outbound fax. You can enable and disable it here. Define the dial permission for fax and submit it. As we've discussed dial rules and dial permissions, I think it wise that I show you actually how to apply these. You do this at the IP extension level. I'll go to IP extensions. If I look at extension 100, you can see currently it's set to have a dial permission of dial plan 1. I can change that here under the dial permission and set it to one of the ones I've created, international and local. There you go. So we now know what permissions this extension user has. That concludes our section on outbound rules and outbound calls, which is quite a big section, but inbound and outbound calls are pretty crucial to the operation of your PBX system. Next, I want to talk about departments. Departments are new in version 3, and they are very similar to ring group. Now you have more flexibility to manage your business departments. I also want to talk about conference rooms within version 3 software. Conference calls are really easy within version 3, and you can organize a conference call just by providing an admin password and participate just by using a guest pass. Let's have a look at conferencing. So we need to log into the web GUI and go to the telephony and the advanced features. Here you can see conference. And already pre-configured are a range of conference numbers that can be used. Extension is the number to dial, to enter, the guest password, administrator password, signify whether callers need to wait for the leader, stipulate whether to announce the caller during the conference call as they enter and leave, and whether or not to actually record the conference call. So let's have a look at those. Here you can change the password for the guest, the administrator. This one's a good one, as you can define the permissions for whether you can dial out to invite new participants or not. So you can enable leader wait on and off, enable announce caller, and enable call recording should you require it. So that is conferencing. Forwarding is a great feature to have on a PBX, and under version 3 this is greatly enhanced. If we log into the GUI, I can give you a demonstration of call forwarding. So let's go to telephony, advanced features again. Here you can see call forward and the advanced options. You have a choice whether you want to notify a caller before forwarding. So it will play back a voice prompt to the caller before the call is forwarded. That's disabled by default. To add a call forward, select the extension. You can also set the forward type for your extension. So this tells the system to forward a call, whether on busy, it will forward the incoming call when the user is busy. Forward all, so it will forward all incoming calls. No answer and busy will forward the incoming call when no one answers the phone or the user is busy. Forward or no answer forwards the incoming call when no one answers the phone. So you have several options with which to choose from. Number. Here you set the number to forward the incoming calls to. If you do require a prefix for this, then please set it here. And I can enable disable. Activate the forward. And that's it. The forward is fully operational on extension 115. Next, I'd like to talk about Wakeup Calls, which are a great feature in version 3, and they allow you to provide a date, a time, and an extension number with which to issue a wake-up call to. Let's have a look at this then. So go to Wakeup Call, add, set the date and the time for the wake-up call. Select the extension for the wake-up call. Submit. And there you go. The wake-up call is set. As simple as that. Follow Me is a great feature. It allows you to route incoming calls to multiple phones in a specified sequence. Ideal for when you don't know exactly where you're likely to be during the business working week. You can create a unique call flow for yourself. Let's log into the GUI and have a look at how to configure Follow Me. So go to the advanced features, select Follow Me. Under the configure section, The first option, always take call, this really gives you a choice between when the inbound call reaches your phone and you pick up, whether to get the option to pick the call up or whether the PBX will just pass you the call. So record caller name, we'll ask the caller his name and record that name so it can be announced to you. I'll switch that on. Now I'll add a follow me. So I choose the extension number for the follow me, the ring duration, and then I start creating my list of numbers and set a ring time out for the destination number. This denotes the extension ring time before the inbound call is forwarded out. I'll add some more numbers. So in this scenario, we'll call 110 and then 113. And there you go, it's set. Direct Inward System Access, or Deezer, is not a new feature for CoolVox systems, but we've made some good improvements and it's now more sophisticated in the way it can be configured. Deezer, if you're not aware, is the ability from a remote phone to dial into the PBX system, enter a password and be greeted with a dial tone, so you can then make outbound calls directly through the PBX. Let us have a look at how Deezer is configured. So under telephony, advanced features, Deezer, add a new Deezer, give it a name, assign a PIN code. We talked about PIN codes earlier in the presentation. This PIN code is used for authorization of the inbound Deezer caller. Response time. This is the maximum waiting duration before hanging up if the dial number is incomplete or invalid. Digit timeout, the maximum interval time between digits when dialing numbers. Default is 5. The extension number on the system for this Deezer. And finally, what permissions are assigned to the Deezer. So, for instance, what rights will you allow for outbound dialing? Maybe restrict it to non-international calls, for instance. Let's submit that. And there you go. Very simple setup, Deezer. CoolVox version 3 firmware supports both paging and intercom functionality. This allows you to both broadcast to all phones on your PBX system. You can also run in full duplex mode and conduct a conversation. I'll demonstrate now how to set up paging and intercom. First, I'll log into the GUI. Under telephony, advanced features, across to the right hand side, select paging and intercom. First I need to add a new paging and intercom. Define the group number. This is the number to call to enact the intercom. Give it a meaningful name. Choose a mode. So if you choose duplex, then you are allowing two-way communications. And finally, select the group members. So these are the extensions that you want to become part of the paging and intercom group. Note, analog phones and soft phones will not work. The device has to support auto answer. So I'll select a few extensions. And submit. And there you can see a new paging and intercom group has been created called Sales Team. Call queues are a truly enterprise feature. They allow you to manage inbound calls, route them to available agents, and when agents aren't available, then keep inbound calls in a queue ready to be answered by the next available agent. Let's show you how this is set up. So again, going to telephony and on the advanced features. Select queues. Let's add a new call queue. Give your queue a name. Define the number to identify or to call the queue. Determine your ring strategy. There's quite a few listed here, so there's quite a few available options. Choose the one that most suits your needs. Set your music on hold that will be played to callers in the queue. You can define static agents. So these are agents that are always in the queue. Therefore, these agents don't need to log in. And or set your dynamic agents. So these agents will need to log into the queue. I'll select some of these. And submit. And there I have defined a very simple queue. Smart DID is a really nice feature. I think the best way to try and explain it is you make an outbound call to a customer. The customer doesn't answer the call. You don't leave a message. The customer realizes that they've had a missed call, so they decide to call back. In normal scenario, it would mean they would contact a switchboard, not necessarily know it was you who was calling, and would therefore not know who had called them. With Smart DID, that number is stored in a database, and should the customer call you back, the call will route directly to you. So let's show you how that's all set up. So as per normal, we need to log into the GUI. Again, under telephony, advanced features, and then click the little arrow and select Smart DID. Here's an explanation of what I was referring to earlier. So we can enable or disable Smart DID. We can set the validation time for the records stored in the database. 1 day, 2 days, a month, 1 week. And we can select the trunks that Smart DID applies to. So I'll submit that. And that's it. Set. Version 3 supports call recording, so you can record calls, conference calls, and one-touch recordings made from your handsets. These can all be downloaded, and there's some good facilities for searching and recovering calls. I'll give you a demonstration of call recording on version 3. So if I look at call recording here in the reporting section, I can set a full range of search criteria, such as who the call is from. So I can search on extension 115 if I choose, between a certain date and time period. I can search a number that has been called. So if I want to know who has called 1110 within that date time period, I can search all calls just by leaving those fields blank. I can search on the trunk name, particularly useful if you want to know, say, who's dialing out over an international trunk. And you can also search on PIN codes. So PIN codes are usually defined to restrict trunks, so you can search on who has been using those PIN codes and therefore using the restricted trunks. You can select the type of call, whether it be outbound, inbound, or an internal call. Or all calls. You can do this exactly the same for conference recordings. If you set your conferences to record the call, then you can search for them here. And you can play back the recordings directly from the GUI. Fast forward. And a good feature as well is you can actually download the calls directly to your desktop. One-touch recordings can also be displayed and downloaded here. As I mentioned, one-touch recordings are usually done via the handset. And that's it, a brief overview of call recording features within version 3 firmware. Network settings in version 3 firmware are now all neatly set out in a single page, and you can access things such as VPN, static routing, DHCP and DDNS. There is also now a security center to give you greater protection for your communications, and this is a neat location where all your security related features and settings are kept. Let's have a look at some of these then. So the new security center, here you can set your firewall. As it says there, we do strongly recommend you keep your firewall functionality always switched on, as there's plenty of hacking going on the internet, especially if you use SIP trunks. So we'll switch that on. You can set the firewall to drop ping requests. Ideally, the PBX will be sat behind an external firewall anyway. Drop all is a pretty powerful rule. So if it's enabled, it drops everything except for the web UI. Everything else will be terminated. GeoIP is a nice new feature where you can grant access to IP addresses from certain countries only. we'll switch those on. So here's the GeoIP. I have a list of countries that I can select with a search facility as well. If your SIP trunk provider is in China, then really that's the only access you should be granting. So version 3 also comes with complete SIP intrusion detection and prevention. You can switch that on or off. You can set the maximum illegal attempts before a block. You can set the observation time of the illegal attempts. And you can set how long you wish to ban the offending IP address for. So we'll submit that. Here's a specific one just for IAX related traffic and also web related traffic, and if enabled, SSH traffic. So you have very granular control over what can block. In the IP blacklist section, you can add in offending IP addresses that you wish to block. It gives you a breakdown of the type, the IP address. And finally, there's a whitelist where you can add in trusted IP addresses. And you can define the protocol that you wish to trust those IP addresses with. I'll put one in here as an example. I'll leave everything at default. I'll add my IP address and network mask. And I'll submit that. Very comprehensive set of security features now available. So that concludes our 3-part series focusing on the new version 3 firmware for Zycoo CoolVox IP PBX. I hope you found all these useful. Thanks for your time and goodbye.